Welcome back! We're diving straight into part 2 of Gimme That Pacifier. Buckle up, here's what happens next. She wondered why she was even making up excuses. After all, they were the ones making fun of her. The children were driving Gela crazy, and the thought of putting them all into eternal sleep flashed through her mind. In any case, Gela was determined to grow up quickly and fully master black magic. These children had little energy, but their character suggested that within her lay a far more dangerous power. The little girl suddenly realized she considered them her enemies. One boy, looking down at her angrily and calling her a bastard, asked if she thought she was better than everyone else. Gela wasn't about to let their rudeness slide. If she'd had a crystal, she'd have pushed them into the water without a second thought. She grabbed a rock and threw it right at one boy's forehead. Then she took off running. He screamed, ordering everyone to catch up. Gela knew that if she was caught, things would end badly. She ran as fast as she could. Somewhere nearby, a man was saying how honored the children were to be invited here. The Duke was delighted by their presence. Charente said he was confused by the influx of guests, but still glad they accepted the invitation. Only 20 families were invited, but almost everyone showed up, so it was overwhelming. The Duke wondered where Kishan had disappeared to. He noticed a boy sitting on the floor, walked over, and called him over, asking what he was doing there. Kishan timidly admitted he was looking for the baby. He knew her father didn't love Sharina. Charente asked if he was talking about the same girl he'd slept with that night. The boy confirmed this and added that his grandfather had mentioned Sharina's presence at the banquet. Charente was surprised and asked if his father had told him the truth. Kishan nodded, but admitted he couldn't find her. He said sadly that he'd definitely seen Sharina with other children. Charente thought the little one looked like a snail. He didn't know where she'd gone, but he knew there would be traces left behind. It was difficult to immediately discern the direction. There were crawling marks and small footprints on the ground. Charente wondered if the child couldn't just sit still. The children were also looking for Sharina. One of them pointed in the direction and said she was somewhere there. Gela would have advised him to stop. The boy called her a cockroach, and this only reinforced her opinion of them. She doubted these children were even guests of Charente. They were all bullying one child, so they were the cockroaches. Gela decided she would take revenge on the one standing in the center. But first, she needed to catch her breath. She crawled for a long time and finally reached the pond. Her body felt exhausted and was recovering poorly. Eventually, the children caught her. The boy said he wouldn't let Sharina escape again. Gela knew she had to do something. She clutched the crystal and tried to speak. It was all over for them. Meanwhile, Charente was trying to figure out where the children had gone, not knowing why he was looking for her. The feeling of disappointment grew. The Duke didn't like what was happening. His garden had been destroyed at Hela's whim, and yet she was acting as if nothing had happened. Sharina reminded him of his brother, Balian. Before leaving the family, he had done many things, and the memory of it left him with regret. Suddenly, Charente heard cries for help. From the voices, he realized they were children. Running closer, he couldn't believe his eyes. They were floating in the air. The children begged for mercy and insisted they were wrong. Charente noticed the magic stone in the little girl's hands and couldn't believe a child could do such a thing. He couldn't understand where she got the stone from. One of the boys cried and said it was all his own fault. Charente couldn't let her continue, or the consequences would be dire. He called Sharina. The little girl noticed that it was the first time the Duke had called her by name. Gela blamed herself for not finishing it faster. She wanted to deal with them immediately, but she knew any bruise would cause a huge scandal. She wasn't too upset that Charente had noticed what was happening. Even if he wanted to put her into eternal sleep, she could teleport using the stone. She couldn't yet freely cast complex spells, but she would definitely be able to do so once. Charente took the stone away and told her that, no matter what, she mustn't harm her family. The girl desperately wanted him to let her go. Charente noticed how stubborn she was and ordered her to stop using the stone. Gela couldn't see anything and couldn't resist. The hand covering her eyes was warm. The anger didn't go away, but the warmth was strangely calming and made it difficult to concentrate. Charente said Sharina was capable of using magic. She got caught. Being caught doing that was extremely bad. It was common knowledge that the clowns, especially the Charente, hated mages. They were a clan of swordsmen who considered magic a source of misfortune. The baby wanted to return the pacifier. Charente asked if she wanted to let the children go. She looked at him innocently and pretended not to understand. Gela decided the rumors of his heartlessness were true. She couldn't understand how anyone could look at the sweet little girl like that, but she still felt guilty for being caught, choosing the lesser of two evils. Charente said she was addicted to the pacifier. Jella didn't understand what was wrong with her and just wanted it back. Without the pacifier, she was already feeling dizzy. Charente handed it to Sharina. Jella thought he didn't want to touch it, since he was holding it with both hands. She didn't want to believe it was just that she'd reached out with one hand first. Once the pacifier was in her mouth, her racing heart calmed down. The tension that had built up over the day gradually subsided. Gela decided that the pacifier really did help. When you play the role of a child, you inevitably begin to become one. She let the children go, and Charente took the stone. Jella decided to return to Vera and was angry with the Duke. The way he snatched the stone was brutal. Jella couldn't understand where he'd put it, considering Sharina had worked so hard to obtain it. The crystal's power was already half spent, and it could become useless. Charente's smile was frightening. Next time, Gela decided not to respond. Mothers grabbed their sons and begged them not to cry, assuring them that their mother was nearby. Everyone demanded to know what had happened, but the children only clung to their parents. They had bullied Sharina, and now they were portraying her as the villain. They could have sought protection from their parents, but Gela, being the adult inside, had to cope on her own. She desperately wanted to see Vera. Kishan came up behind her and asked if she was okay. Gela barely restrained herself from making a sarcastic remark. Kishan noticed that her dress was dirty. Sharina reached up, and he saw scratches. She immediately hid her hands, remembering the wounds. Gela remembered pretending to be strong and hoped no one noticed the scratches. Charente stood behind her, but she decided not to worry. She couldn't understand why things had gone so far. A woman ran up to the Duke and declared she had heard something incredible. Charente asked again. The woman said the child had used foul magic to put her children into eternal sleep. This infuriated Gela. Charente asked if such a child could use magic. He reminded him that even the youngest sorcerer in history was older. But Baroness Dahlia insisted the child had caused the boys to fall into the water. She shouted that the children were saying the same thing over and over again. There was no evidence. Charente said he doubted it and didn't think the little girl was that smart. These words angered Gela. She couldn't tell if he was defending her or simply refusing to acknowledge the obvious. She hadn't expected public accusations. The Baroness continued to scream, and Gela decided to play the role to the end. Since Charente wouldn't touch her, Sharina would become a paragon of sweetness. The woman insisted it was her, while Sharina pretended to be a normal child. Charente grinned, and Gela thought he found it funny. He said their opinions differed. He called it just a hypothesis, and he recalled that the children constantly pushed and bullied the girl. Charente asked how much longer he had to turn a blind eye to this kind of thing on his estate, and how the Baroness was going to explain it. His words were calm, but the atmosphere was tense. Gela had done her job. Kishan was simply perplexed as to where the little girl had gone. Gela decided to leave the rest to the Duke. They started the fight, and she had to answer. She regretted nothing and didn't know where her stone was now. Suddenly, someone picked her up. It was Deshar. Gela didn't understand why he did it and sensed danger. She thought she might be hit and thrown out as a disgrace to the family. Deshar, however, shouted at her, demanding she oversee the children's upbringing. He couldn't understand how they dared treat a child like that. Holding her close, he asked who dared raise a hand against a member of the clown family. Deshar called her small and defenseless. Gela was outraged by the word helpless. She was small, but not defenseless. She couldn't believe that Deshar Clown had suddenly taken her side. It was only because he didn't know who she really was. During the negotiations, Deshar was also angry, but not to this extent. Gela hated being considered weak, but now it hardly affected her. Charente announced that things had gone too far and the party was over. The guests' faces turned pale with fear. Gela decided not to be angry anymore. She assumed they'd lock her up for a couple of days for magic, but she knew they didn't want to put her into eternal sleep just yet. She couldn't believe she was being defended like that in front of the other nobles. It seemed like everything had ended well. That's what Gela thought. Vera was feeding Sharina, and it was clear they would return to the room. Gela couldn't understand why she was still staying on this estate. Charente turned to her father. It seemed like a normal meal, but it was different. He placed a stone on the table and said it belonged to the little girl. He asked where she got it from and noted that Sharina knew how to use it. Gela was angry that the conversation began before the meal was over. Charente turned to Vera and asked if she had seen the little girl use magic. The maid was surprised and said she had never seen anything like it. Jella felt a little ashamed. Charente asked again, and Vera confirmed her words. The Duke decided that they might have been deliberately hiding it. He noticed that the little girl was smart. Jella decided to continue pretending not to understand anything. They ate and went to bed. The Duke turned to Kishan. Gela had already gotten used to the cold Charente being gentler with him, but she still didn't understand what family was. She didn't know if family was just blood. She wondered if Charente was aware of her own weakness. She was never destined to know. The Duke asked his son if he had seen the little girl throw something into the fireplace. Sharina didn't want Kishan to talk. Kishan happily said it was a straw doll. His attentiveness irritated Gela. She'd been caught doing almost everything except magic. She knew how much the family hated witchcraft. Charente told her father he'd go check the child's room. Deshar didn't understand why. Charente replied that he wanted to check something and asked Vera to show him the way. Deshar declared that if a mage had joined the family, he would come too. Charente sent Kishan to his room after the meal. It was dangerous. The clowns hated magic, especially black magic. Charente was sensitive to it. Every time Gela entered the negotiating room, a darkness emanated from her, and he looked at her sullenly. She knew that if he started looking for evidence, he would be unstoppable. The straw doll was easy to find. Vera noticed that the little girl was nervous and trembling, not understanding why. Gela knew all too well how magicians were treated in this world. They were persecuted, and young sorcerers often became slaves. They arrived. Sharina decided to pretend she didn't understand. Gela knew the truth would come out anyway. While she had the chance, she was going to get the crystals from under the rug and escape. Deshar asked what exactly Charente was looking for. Charente saw a book in the crib. Gela realized something was wrong. She grabbed the crystals, made sure there were 3 of them, and that the pacifier was still in place. The forest became her destination. She didn't know if her body could withstand 3 crystals or if she would survive, but the mansion was no place for her anyway. There was no other choice. Charente turned sharply toward her and moved forward. Gela tried to transport herself immediately. All she needed to do was absorb the mana. She squeezed everything out of herself, and she succeeded. She vanished into thin air. Vera was shocked and couldn't understand where the little girl had disappeared to. Charente realized the child had been able to escape using complex magic. Deshar approached him and shouted, asking what he was going to do. He said he hadn't given him the right to harm the child. Charente tried to calm him down, explaining that he had only wanted to break the stone. He added that even he wouldn't have put a defenseless child into eternal sleep without reason. Deshart had only assumed the worst, and Charente asked if he really looked like that. Deshart admitted he might not have intended to do it, but it was still a cruel act. The father said that drawing the sword was too much, knowing how much his son hated magic. No matter the reason, Deshar would not allow harm to come to the child. Charente only smiled, irritated that they didn't even know where she had disappeared to. Charente said he would send people out to search. He described the unexpected visitor as a mouse that appeared and disappeared. The man remarked that this sounded cruel. Charente replied that it suited him, adding that the uninvited guest had burst into the stranger's house wearing dirty shoes. Mullane said he sensed magic in the mansion and had come to prepare for the unexpected. He apologized if his appearance had irritated the clowns. Charente inquired who the man was. Mullane immediately realized the Duke was deliberately belittling him, despite the fact that he had come to settle the matter. Getting involved with the Duke's family was a bad idea. The Emperor granted Duke Clown special powers, and his family now represented the Iron Empire. Conflict with the clowns meant hostility with the continent's greatest power. The man introduced himself as Melon Salopia and declared himself the new master of the magical tower. His surname was the same as that of the tower's rightful owners. That was Gela Salopia's last name. Much had changed since she disappeared. Charente asked where the former mistress was and why the newcomer himself had come here. The man replied that the previous owner of the magic tower had been put into eternal sleep for an unacceptable crime. Charente asked with a grin. Mullane clarified that she had used forbidden black magic. Moreover, she plunged people into eternal sleep without reason. That's why she was considered a serious threat to Salopia. Deshar noted that at first they used her, but when she became too powerful, everyone became afraid. Charente said this wasn't surprising, as those in power get annoyed when someone earns more than them. He added that Gela's use of black magic has long been an open secret. Deshar mentioned the recent Griffin's appearance and noted that they should have done a better job. Melon replied that it was an unforeseen error and that he was trying to keep everything under control. He added that this was precisely the reason he had come here. Deshar raised his voice, saying that everything that had united their nation was falling apart, and he was standing here as if nothing was happening. No one could have predicted the disappearance of the relic's keeper. Had she been in her place, it wouldn't have happened. Melon seemed like a void that wouldn't have existed if Gela had been there. Melane himself felt this emptiness after Gela's disappearance. Deshar warned that if something like this happened again, he would report it to Salopia, but that wouldn't change anything. Melane said he'd remember the Duke's words. Gela was gone, and now he'd have to sort it all out. He noted that they'd probably need his help. He asked if they had ever noticed any signs of magic before. Charente suggested that his niece had been born with a rare magical gift that no one had even suspected. The little girl sensed the threat and fled with the magic stones. Teleportation is considered simple magic, but it requires years of practice to master. Melan knew Charente's son was still young and guessed his niece was about 7 years old. Escaping with the magic stones at that age was worthy of respect. He believed the girl had exceptional abilities. Even with intensive practice, such magic was only accessible to teenagers. Deshar said this wasn't surprising for a member of the clown family. Melane disagreed, as it was precisely around them that the little girl felt threatened. Melane was confident that finding the child wouldn't be difficult. She hadn't yet fully mastered magic and wouldn't be able to hide her abilities. Gela was certain she would die then, and her short life could have ended right there. Dying at such an age would have been especially sad. How the great Hela had gotten to this point was difficult to comprehend. It was hard for her to even say she was okay. The new language only caused her frustration. She was alone again. Hela hadn't counted on any support after fleeing the Duke's house, but she still regretted the lack of a warm bed and proper food. The thought of having to eat grass again was unbearable. So she decided to become a beggar. She was familiar with the experience, and the second time was easier, but a child shouldn't live like this. Gela thought she'd escape at 3 or 4, and she couldn't believe she'd been discovered so quickly. Without easy access to dark magic, surviving in this body would be difficult. She still needed powerful black magic to survive in the vast forest. Suddenly, the little girl noticed something familiar, especially the trees around her. Gela decided there must be fruit trees in that direction. She crawled a bit and was proven right, deciding she was born a fortune teller. Looking closer, the little girl spotted a second pond near the mansion. The origins of magic and the passage of time leave traces that cannot be erased. Melane reported that his niece was somewhere nearby, and they would find her by following a magical thread. Charente said he would forgive the intrusion into the mansion, but only this once. If they entered again without permission, no matter the reason, he would be finished. Charente held his sword to Melane's neck. He added that Melane wouldn't escape unharmed if it happened again. Melane didn't even notice when the sword appeared in the Duke's hands. Charente put away his weapon, and Melane said he'd go first, since anything could happen. Charente turned to his father and asked where he was going. Deshar replied that he was going to look for the baby. They couldn't even imagine how scared she was when she used magic, so they needed to hurry. Charente was astonished to see the crystal in Deshar's hands. He asked if he had given his crystal to the child. Deshar replied that she was a true genius. Deshar jumped down. Kant approached the master. Charente ordered everyone to prepare everything and follow their father. The servants accepted the order. The little girl noticed tracking magic. There are many types of it, designed to locate people or objects. It is often used by inexperienced mages. It's simple in itself, but Gela couldn't use it now. Before, a single flick of her finger was enough. Gela assumed they'd hired a mage. This was surprising, as the clown family distrusted magic. She remembered Kishan's words about the mages who had arrived to guard the artifacts. There must have been a lot of mages, and the clowns had probably asked for help. It remained unclear why they were looking for her so persistently. It would have been easier to pretend they didn't know her. The girl couldn't believe they wanted to put her into eternal sleep. She realized that Charente Clown was stubborn to the point of recklessness, and she still didn't understand why she had ended up in their garden. She needed to at least move beyond the mansion. With her current limited abilities, the hardest part was memorizing spells. Magicians use magic by memorizing formulas. It all depends on talent and mental images. Gela used to perform magic without words, only imagining the result. But her weak, childish body didn't allow for this. Ideally, she should relearn magic from the very beginning. The problem was having to go through the whole process again. Suddenly, the trail disappeared. Jella tried to speak but couldn't and didn't understand how to learn spells with such pronunciation. The ancient language is difficult for everyone. She expected fatigue from cramming, but not such a dreadful pronunciation. It seemed as if this body had no tongue at all. There was almost no energy left after using magic, but they needed to find a place to sleep. It was then that Mullane found the little girl. He asked if she was Duke Clown's niece. The girl remained silent. The voice was all too familiar. Melon noted that she was younger than he thought. He had once sworn eternal fidelity and friendship to the protagonist. Jella despised him and hated Melon for his betrayal. The little girl had silver eyes, and everything fit. It wasn't that cold voice, but a different, brave voice, Melon's. Melon asked if she had used the magic stone to escape. Gela immediately pulled away. He apologized and said he just wanted to make sure. He found it hard to believe the little girl could teleport on her own. She was silent, and Melon noticed that she was completely uncommunicative. He begged Sharina to say something, not understanding what was happening. The same voice, the same expression, the furrowed brow. Melon sat down next to her and said that her uncle and grandfather would be arriving soon. Until then, they would have to be together. Gela was shocked that he was seriously talking to the child. She knew that if he spoke, only meaningless sounds would come out. She didn't want to show Melon her weakness. The man said he'd heard that Gela hadn't even considered magic as a child. And he too. Gela couldn't understand how he could smile and calmly pronounce the name of the one he'd abandoned. Melon said that Gela spoke of herself as the first person to use magic at a young age, but never gave an exact age. He spoke of her as if she were still alive. In fact, she wasn't. Melon felt embarrassed, realizing he'd said too much to the child. He noticed Sharina was afraid and said that fear goes away when you talk to someone. This hurt Gela, since she had once said those words to him. Melon noted that it must be difficult for her, given her natural talent and the clown family. He assumed that was why she ran away. But the little girl had escaped because she'd nearly died. She regretted not having considered how easily she'd be caught. It was as usual. Melon was standing in her way again. Gela didn't understand why she had to sit next to him. She felt like he was about to cast a spell, and she didn't have the strength to resist. The enemy was too close. It would have been 100 times better to be in Charente's arms than in Milan's. He spoke of his strength and help as if it were something difficult. Gela wanted him to stop. Whatever the reasons or regrets, she would not forgive him. Suddenly, Deshar called out to the little girl. Charente remarked that it was a good thing she hadn't gone far. This irritated Gela, since it had all happened by accident. No one could know how her escape would end. She wanted to leave, but relying solely on the stone's magic was presumptuous. As a child, Gela shed a sea of tears. Charente came over and began wiping her soiled palms. Deshar didn't understand why she was crying again. Charente said she wasn't crying. Deshar held out the crystal and promised to give it to her if she calmed down. Gela had no strength left. She needed her pocket, because her grandfather gave her stones every day, but she couldn't take them. This angered her. Deshar said that if she stopped crying, he would give her 10 times as many of these trinkets. 10 times. The calculations seemed convincing. The little girl reached out to Deshar, and he said her grandfather was nearby. Charente didn't understand what was happening. Gela wondered if Deshar's good mood was a joke. Deshar picked up the baby and noticed that she was dirty. He was glad that Sharina had magical talent. Fortunately, it seemed the main character wouldn't be put into eternal sleep. Gela wondered if Deshar could give her something in exchange for the 10 lost crystals. Besides, she wanted to disappear right then and there. Being near Melon was unbearable, even breathing the same air as him. Deshar told Charente they were returning. He agreed. The hierarchy between them was obvious, though Charente's reputation would have been sufficient. He could have defeated Deshar and taken the Duke's place, but he respected him. Charente thanked Melon for saving them from many troubles. Charente sent Melon off to rest. He was happy to help, but his tone remained rude, reminding Gela of their farewell. Gela couldn't understand why she had such a hard time controlling herself around Melon. He asked how old the little girl was. Deshar replied that Sharina was about a year old. Melon was impressed by such precocious magical talent. However, he doubted that she would be able to wield magic well in the future, especially in the Hyron Empire, where magicians were not welcome. Melon said that if the family gave permission, he would like to take the baby under his guardianship. In Salopia, she would receive support and become an outstanding mage. He believed that it would be better for her to live in Salopia, since the clown family did not like mages. Dishar asked sharply how the stranger dared discuss his family's affairs. Melaine felt a strong pressure, as if the air had become heavy. If Charente was a slowly advancing tsunami, Dishar was like an avalanche. Jella knew that with such a man at her side, she had nothing to fear. Those she considered enemies protected her, and the one she trusted became her enemy. It seemed like someone's cruel irony. Melaine said he was only speaking facts, and that they knew how mages were treated in their empire, but training in Salopia would be different. Charente replied that a man who betrayed his oath and his master could not count on his family's trust. He found this ridiculous. He added that he would not have trusted him with even a stone from his mansion, let alone a child. Melaine said it would be difficult for them if Gela became stronger. Dishar replied that he knew about her use of dark magic. He warned her. At first he was confused and asked her not to take advantage of her, but she only smiled and said she was prepared for the worst. Jella was sure there was nothing to worry about. She'd met the clowns a long time ago and it wasn't a surprise. She met with them to express their opinions and learn about the situation in the country. These meetings, although unpleasant, provided her with valuable experience. Dishar said Gela was a better leader than him. Gela thought she'd seen that expression on Melaine's face before. The Duke declared that in his family, his word was law, and even the Emperor could not dictate to him. If Milan dared to disobey, he would know the strength of his family. It sounded bold, but Hela was sure he would have said the same thing even to the Emperor. In his land, his word was unquestionable. Jella felt as if a crown shone above Dishar's head. He was a truly remarkable leader, and she wondered if she could wear one. Father and Charente began to leave. For the first time, Gela felt gratitude towards them. She called her grandfather, and he asked what had happened. Sharina didn't know how to express her gratitude, so she tried to say thank you, albeit with mistakes. The day had been too long. Charente told his father he'd been thinking about the same thing all week. Sharina had used dark magic. Dishard had been too busy to notice his son. Dishard was surprised to see Charente there. He glanced at the papers in his father's hands and noticed contracts for the purchase of magical crystals. Kant had said his father was busy all week, and now it became clear why. Dishar explained that Sharina simply liked magic crystals, and with her talent, she wouldn't waste them. Charente knew her father paid a lot of attention to the baby, even though she wasn't yet officially part of the family. He noted that imperial crystals were considered the finest in quality. Dishard said it might be worthwhile to speak with the emperor. He didn't understand why Charente had even come. Charente wanted to discuss a book. This book was in Sharina's room. Charente assumed it was the little girl who used it to perform dark magic. Dishard was shocked and refused to believe it. He asked if they were talking about Baroness Sullivan. Dishard noted there was no evidence. Charente said the Baron might become suspicious if he hired mages. If not for the conflict with the Baroness, there would have been no one to suspect. Dishard decided to check everything just in case, and commission a search for evidence, if any existed. He also needed to talk to Sharina. Charente wondered how his father was going to talk to a child who was only a year old. Dishard said he needed to go to the fortress, and Charente would take care of the baby. Charente thought that with Sharina's arrival in their family, everything was going wrong. The little girl was delighted by the huge number of crystals. Vera asked if she really enjoyed looking at stones so much. Of course, Jella liked this. Before her lay magical crystals above level B, and with them, she wouldn't have to worry about the next few years. There was another reason to rejoice. The food had improved noticeably lately, and snacks were brought regularly. Vera praised the little girl, and she was genuinely happy. Sharina tried to pronounce Vera's name. The maid introduced herself, and every time the little girl called her name, Vera blossomed with happiness. Gela watched her reactions closely. This was also pronunciation practice. Jella hoped it would continue like this. The food, the bed, the pillow, and Vera seemed like heaven. Suddenly there was a knock, and Sharina became curious about who had arrived during mealtime. It was Charente. He noticed the baby was eating. Jella didn't want to see him. Vera greeted the young lord. He asked if Sharina had eaten. The maid replied that she had not yet, but Charente ordered her to leave anyway. The baby didn't understand what was happening. Charente said he'd feed her himself. Jella didn't like it. and Vera was worried, but she bowed and left. Sharina didn't want to be without Vera. Too much time had passed, and how could she know if he'd added something dangerous to the food? Charente said he wasn't so vile as to poison children. Jella was surprised and thought he could read her mind, but he could still put her into eternal sleep at will. Gela decided that if necessary, she would escape again. Charente turned to the little girl. He warned that if Sharina used the magic crystals in his presence again, he would take everything from her. Jella was deeply worried about her stones. Tension hung between them, but she had no choice. She was relieved to notice that the food tasted unchanged and that no one had tried to poison her. Charente noticed that Sharina seemed much smarter than Balian. He hadn't expected the little girl to be capable of dark magic. Gela was horrified that he already knew about it. She didn't understand why he was laughing. When he touched her, she wanted to scream. He was curious to see how much she understood him, and Gela understood every word. The Duke said it would be better to know in advance who she was planning to put into eternal sleep next. Hela wondered if he realized he was talking to a 1-year-old child. Even if he'd called her a sweet little genius, it wouldn't have touched him. Belian Clown continued to cause suffering even after death. Charente told her she should stop her senseless behavior. He wasn't going to stalk her or put her into an eternal sleep. She just needed to live peacefully and be nice. This is what carelessness is. Childhood time dragged on endlessly slowly. Gela dozed off at every opportunity, while eating, with her eyes closed, or while trying to walk. 2 weeks had passed since that warning. Since then, Charente had rarely visited her, but suddenly he began to take over Vera's duties. He fed her from a distance, holding a spoon. There was no point in hiding it. Every time Charente took her spoon, Gela got angry. He was so disgusting that Gela decided to teach herself to eat. During the meal, she stole a spoon while Vera wasn't looking. When Vera returned, Sharina was overjoyed. The maid asked if the little girl had called her. Gela admired Vera every time, especially her smile when she ran to her call. Vera said Sharina pronounced her name well and called their lady a genius. Gela adored Vera's excited murmuring. Her small body seemed to grow stronger from the compliments, and she didn't even notice it happening. Vera asked to see her face and brought her some pudding. Gela was sad, unable to understand why she couldn't feed herself. Vera had previously been surprised by the baby's desire to feed herself. It was time for spoon training. Gela decided it was okay to spill a little, but when she raised the spoon to her mouth, she found there was nothing on it. Everything had spilled, and she hadn't even noticed. Before, her reflexes had been praised, but now she felt like a complete fool. It was terrifying. Being weak and stupid was the worst thing. Besides, if they found out about her abilities, they would start belittling her. This was the most troubling thing. Meanwhile, Vera was talking about creamy caramel pudding. It was pure pleasure. Vera wanted the little one to try it as soon as possible. Gela didn't know how to resist such temptation. Her mouth filled with sweetness. For Hela, pudding was the best invention. She decided that if she returned to Salopia, she would gather the best chefs. The clown family were all gourmets. Vera said the Duke had ordered the baby to be brought in after the meal and remarked on how quickly she was growing. Today, Vera was carrying Gela again, and she didn't like it. She loved Vera, but Charente Clown was the best at carrying her. She hated to admit it, but his experience with children made her feel much more comfortable. Vera simply lacked the experience. Vera announced that they had arrived. Gela was surprised to see the guest room and understood why the maid was so tense. Vera reported that she had brought the lady, as Dashar had instructed. The room was crowded, and the atmosphere felt heavy. Charente Clown's gaze was cold. Dashar exuded the same. Even the two on the sofa looked tense. Gela tugged at Vera's sleeve, not wanting her to leave. Dashar noticed that it was unusual to be among people. Gela silently begged Vera to stay. She seriously thought Vera couldn't leave, even if it was just a child in front of her. But the maid said she'd be outside the door. Sharina was against it. Gela understood that Vera depended on her pay and wouldn't listen to the little girl. She should have paid for all this patience herself. Dashar approached Sharina and asked her to play with the magic crystal. It looked high quality. She'd been given them often lately. Usually these were level A crystals, and sometimes even level C. Gela didn't understand where Dashar got so many of them from. The woman said she'd heard about purchases from the imperial family. Gela felt like she'd seen this woman somewhere before. Her face resembled someone dear to her. But Gela decided that was impossible, because that person couldn't be here. Dashar said he had a deal with the emperor. The woman reproached him for his secrecy. Her wine-colored hair and silvery eyes captivated Gela. The little girl realized she'd called Dashar father. To call him that, you had to be part of the clown family. Gela assumed the woman was from their clan, but she'd never heard of such a relative. There was absolutely no information, and that was alarming. She also wondered what connection the woman had with the man next to her. He looked like a swordsman, but didn't look like a relative. Deshar asked what was wrong, as the conversation had suddenly turned to Balian's child. The woman said the baby looked less like Bali than she thought. Sharente asked Ranian why she was there. She replied that he hadn't changed at all and was still talking to his sister. Gela couldn't believe it was really Ranian. The Duke asked if she had left her family. Ranian shrugged, and Sharente asked again why she had come. Ranian said she came to take Bali's daughter because she was certain she was being mistreated. Sharente asked for whose benefit she was doing this. She admitted that at first she was afraid to upset them. She didn't need permission. Bali had asked for it himself, and there wouldn't be any legal problem. The voice and the movements left no doubt. It was Ranian. Gela admired her, the soul of the battlefield and her greatest love. Sharente asked if she was claiming that a dead man had said this and called it absurd. Ranian took out the letter and said that Bali had written it in case of his sudden death, and it had recently come into her hands. Deshar was surprised and asked if he was referring to Balian's letter. Ranian said he wanted her to take Sharina. Deshar noted that the little girl was living comfortably. Sharente agreed. Ranian replied that she would raise Sharina as her own daughter. It dawned on Gela that Ranian wanted to adopt her. The idea seemed wonderful, as she hated family feuds. Ranian was one of the few people Gela truly respected. Books were written, and songs were composed about her, even amidst blood and darkness. She moved with her sword like a moon in the darkness. As a mercenary, she served on the front lines and became a legend. There was only one book about her, and Gela had 3 copies of the first edition. She even bought Ranian's sword at auction. Gela collected everything that belonged to her. When Ranian's fame reached its peak, even her figurines were sold, and Gela collected them. She couldn't believe Ranian was from the clown family. It would be wonderful if she became Sharina's mother. Ranian noticed the baby reaching out to her and picked her up. Sharina was literally beaming, and Gela was happy. She pressed herself against Ranian, not expecting to find her in this body. Her strong arms felt colder than she thought. Ranian asked if the little girl wanted to come with her. Sharina couldn't answer, but she was mentally prepared to follow her anywhere. Gela couldn't understand how a person could be so wonderful. Besides, Ranian was incredibly beautiful. Ranian said it was good that the little girl wasn't afraid of strangers. Sharente said he wouldn't accept that and ordered her to surrender. Ranian replied that she hadn't come for permission. Deshar said she wouldn't dare do anything in his presence. He claimed they were taking good care of Balian's child. Ranian countered that the clown family wouldn't be able to raise her properly. Ranian told her father that he knew she couldn't bear children. Deshar replied that Sharina was special and needed a different path. The daughter asked if it had anything to do with magic. In the letter, Balian wrote that Sharina had magic, like her mother. Deshar asked if it was true. Sharente said the knight's power was sufficient to destroy any evil. Gela had never felt divine power and therefore hadn't considered the knight's path. Among them, there were ways to conceal this power. A comet was visible in his dark pupils. This was a high-class knight. Gela realized she had almost failed her goal, misusing her magic. The man asked if he was in the way. Sharente firmly replied that he was. The dark archmages and the priests were on opposite sides. Upon contact, their powers weaken. The priest becomes vulnerable, just like an archmage next to a powerful knight. They can't coexist without harming each other. It seemed this man knew this. The little girl started calling for her grandfather. She wanted Deshar to help, because her dark magic might disappear. Sharente noticed the child respond. Sharente told Ranian to leave, insisting there was no ill treatment. She asked if the family, which so valued blood purity, was really treating the child well. Sharente replied that the baby's last name was still Clown. Deshar asked Ranian to leave, saying that kidnapping would harm everyone. Gela didn't understand what was happening. She thought it was all because of the knight, and couldn't believe they were on her side. Ranian asked why. Sharente said the man next to him knew the answer. Ranian glanced at the knight, and her disappointment cut Gela painfully. Without dark magic, Gela would have left, but she thought about it and decided to leave this night. Ranian said she had to leave them. Gela realized that Ranian had rejected Sharina. She was sure she would have brought her more joy. Ranian said goodbye. The little girl waved her hand. Gela wanted to apologize because she loved Ranian very much, but that wasn't enough to assuage her hatred. She hoped that one day Ranian would recognize her. For now, Sharina could only lie low and wait for her body to grow and her magic to return. After Ranian left, peace reigned in the mansion. Time flowed smoothly, and then Gela turned 3. She sat and drew. Kishin came and asked if Sharina was there. It had been 2 years since Gela had been living in her body. She was now 3, and she had been hiding because she didn't like meeting him. Kishan, who had tirelessly watched Sharina, was now 7 years old. Gela noticed that he was becoming more and more handsome with age. He genuinely enjoyed searching for her, and that was precisely what irritated her most. It was a shame that Gela's spatial abilities were still weak. Most of the time, the little girl seemed a bit silly, able only to draw and nod her head. Growing up, Sharina learned to calm herself without a pacifier, but if she let her guard down, she acted like a normal child. When thoughts requiring concentration arose, it was especially difficult without a pacifier. Still, Gela was glad that the pacifier was almost unnecessary in everyday life. First, she needed to get rid of the most annoying problem, Kishan. The little girl teleported and, fortunately, was now able to walk on her own. The maid accidentally bumped into Sharina, immediately apologizing and saying she hadn't noticed her because of her height. The maids still often ignored the baby. Sharante and Deshar Clown were unaware of this. As soon as Sharina learned to walk, she began avoiding them, and their encounters became less and less frequent. Gradually, everyone lost interest in her and returned to their own affairs. Deshar Clown sometimes called her, so she would call him Grandpa. He gave her treats and magic stones. Gela couldn't understand what good was in paying so much attention to a useless child. It looked as if the owner was having fun with a pet. The maids whispered that the girl's mother was a gypsy. They said again and again that Sharina had spoiled their precious young master. The servants couldn't understand why they kept a child without a last name in the mansion. Gela didn't care, but these words angered her. She wanted to get out of here more and more. After being caught practicing black magic, she could no longer put those she disliked into eternal sleep. Moreover, her mana recovery was slower than expected, perhaps due to the daily training. But now she could use more types of magic than she could as an infant. But that wasn't enough. Gela needed her previous level of strength, and practice was taking too much time. And most importantly, Sharina didn't want to stay in this mansion. She considered talking to Sharente. At that moment, she heard Sharente's voice asking how long Sharina would be there. Gela decided to peek and saw him with Deshar. Deshar asked how old Sharina was. Sharente replied 3, and remarked that it was time to let her go. Deshar agreed. Gela didn't understand where they were going to send her. Sharente added that, since she had clown blood, she must attend the academy until she came of age. Gela wondered if such a rule existed, and then she remembered the rumors that nobles sent illegitimate or unwanted children to the academy's nursery. The thought made her angry. Gela decided it would be best to leave her at home. Deshar said he was confident they would find a way out of the situation with time. Deshar asked when the reception period ended this year. Sharente noticed Sharina. The girl just wanted to be left alone. She was happy to be able to eat well and live independently. Thanks to Deshar Clown's generosity, Sharina had no financial problems until she reached adulthood. The little girl asked if she would be abandoned. Deshar remained silent. Sharina asked again when she would be thrown out. She wanted Deshar to answer so she could find out about shelters in advance. She called for her grandfather. Gela wanted to prepare herself for being kicked out. Deshar was surprised and asked when he'd said such a thing. He explained that he'd only wanted to send her to the academy. He asked Sharina to pretend she hadn't heard anything, as the decision hadn't been made yet. Sharina replied that it still sounded like he wanted to get rid of her. Gela wanted them to be honest and admit they simply wanted to get her out of their lives. Wasting her childhood at the academy seemed like a waste of time. She waited for Sharente to tell her to just leave. Gela didn't understand why Sharente froze. She started screaming for them to just get rid of her. Her own slurred pronunciation irritated her. She didn't understand why they had to send her there. If she was annoying, they could have just let her go and started a new life. If Gela were in their place, she'd quickly get rid of useless people like Sharina. The child could be given into foster care or sent to an orphanage and let her live as best she can. Sharente asked where she was going. Sharina replied that she was going for a walk. He understood and allowed her to return later. Jella didn't understand when they would finally throw her out. Dashar came up and gave her a level C magic stone. He handed out such things casually. Sharina thanked him. Dashar said he didn't hate her, but there were circumstances that couldn't be changed, and asked if she understood that. Jella wanted him to stop making excuses. They loved her, but they would still turn away. She saw no difference between these words and Sharina's father's actions. Jella thought Dashar Clown wasn't a coward, but she was wrong. Regardless, she decided to leave with the magic stones, smiling. Jella decided to learn everything about orphanages. She needed the one farthest from the capital, where rumors wouldn't circulate. She decided to look for information in the library. Then she drew cards with the message that she was leaving. Everything was ready. Each drawing took up an entire page, so there were a lot of them. Jella wasn't sure if it would work. The handwriting was childish, but a careful eye could decipher everything. They'll find out it was Sharina who left it. But she had no intention of returning to the clowns. They might not even recognize her handwriting. She used red to make it more noticeable. Jella hesitated, but she felt she had to at least say something. Sharente Clown is smart and will understand. Jella had done everything necessary. All that remained was to leave the house, which she had warned about. According to the library, there were many shelters in the Empire. In the capital too, but Jella decided to go as far away as possible. This time, they could truly put her into eternal sleep. The further the better. With her current abilities, she'd have to teleport about 5 times. Luckily, she had magic stones and training experience. This world was very different from the previous one. Space could be used as storage, but without the innate ability to create it, even with spells, it was difficult. So there was only one way. She needed to fuel her imagination. She couldn't put it into words, so she could only imagine it all in her head. Magic doesn't like big words, and the power was weaker. But after a week of hard work, she finally succeeded. All that was left was to leave the mansion. Vera came in and asked if Sharina was there, bringing food. This was just the moment Jella needed. Jella heard a lot from Vera, who cared for her more than anyone else. It was sad to leave at 3. Sharina told Vera to be happy. Vera asked again and said she was already happy because Sharina was there. Jella replied that she would live happily too. Vera wished the little girl to eat well, grow up, and become a sorceress. Jella wasn't sure about the others, but Vera should leave a gift. Vera said she was leaving and wished her sweet dreams. Sharina thanked her. Vera looked embarrassed and said she'd see her tomorrow. Jella decided to leave right then and there. Meeting them in the first place had been a mistake. She wanted nothing to do with his family. Leaving was the right decision. Jella fled with conflicting feelings. Sharente and Dashar Clown turned out not to be so bad. Sometimes they cared for her. And Kishan too. It was a shame to leave everything she'd worked for, especially Vera. The barrier of space, the promise of time travel. The lands beyond were inaccessible, but a hidden path opened before her. The House of Luck. She's finally here. The magic required rest every 3 hours. She arrived here after 5 teleportations. Jella was tired from the 10-hour journey. If she stayed, someone would think she'd been abandoned to take her. All the magic stones were used up. The woman opened the door and was surprised to see the child. Jella realized she needed to look as pitiful as possible and began begging for food. She quietly asked if they could eat there. Jella wasn't used to formalities. The woman looked kind, and a naive guy stood next to her. They looked alike, and the girl decided they were related. The woman asked who had brought her. Jella wanted to tell the truth, but changed her mind. She said it was her uncle. All she got from Sharente Clan was stress. Jella added that her uncle told her to wait there and promised food. The woman was surprised and asked who this man was. She felt sorry for the little girl, thinking she had been abandoned. But it wasn't so. Jella left on her own. She was no longer weak and helpless. The woman took her in her arms and asked if she wanted to live here. Being here was already a success. Sharente wouldn't be coming, and that was a relief. Perhaps he'd even be glad to see her go. After all, he'd been the first to praise her. The girl said everything was fine. The woman invited her to come with her. Jella thought she seemed worried. In the morning, Vera came into Sharina's room and asked if she was awake. She noticed the beautiful sun and suggested they go for a walk after breakfast, but the room was unusually quiet. Usually, Sharina would mutter something or greet her. Now it seemed as if no one was there. Vera pulled back the covers and realized the baby was gone. There were sheets of paper with farewells on the bed. She wondered if Sharina had written them herself. 10 years ago, the Empire fought a massive war to unify its lands. The empire won, but the damage was severe. It became clear that more shelters were needed, as the current conditions were dire. Fortunately, one clean and comfortable home remained. It was regularly sponsored, so the conditions were better. Gela noticed how the animals strolled calmly through the garden. The nannies there treated the children well, and the children themselves looked well groomed. Gela decided she'd made the right choice. The woman said she still didn't know her name. She asked the baby's name. Gela had 2 names, but neither could be said. She introduced herself as Helsha. She quickly connected Hella and Sharina. The name seemed appropriate. The woman said it was wonderful. The nanny told Helsha that she needed a bath first. The woman was surprised, noting that the baby was already very clean. She said she'd introduce her to the others. Gela didn't like that. Meeting a crowd of children like Kishan was repulsive. Gela knew she'd hardly live alone. She didn't expect to start missing her soft bed so quickly, but she told herself not to be weak. She'd only be here for a couple of years. The nanny showed her the playroom. The nanny suggested going out to play with friends. The little girl agreed, but was corrected and told to say, "Okay, headmistress." Gela was surprised that even the answers had to be adjusted. If her memory served her correctly, her family had fought in the war too. The war had ended long ago, but the consequences were still visible. Many still haven't recovered from the losses. Wars are disgusting. Gela said okay to the headmistress. The woman was delighted that the little girl was learning so quickly and told her to make herself at home. Gela didn't understand the point of talking about home. Dishar screamed, demanding an explanation. He scolded Vera for losing her child again. Vera tearfully insisted that everything was wrong. She came to check on Sharina and wake her up, but the room was empty. Sharente asked her father what had happened. Dishar said Sharina was missing. Sharente asked again and recalled how many times he had forbidden her to use magic without permission. He assumed she'd simply gone out and would be back soon. Vera said otherwise, and the lady had left a letter. This surprised Dishard. He reminded her that she couldn't write yet. Vera showed him the note. Sharente read the simple words about her leaving. He assumed it was a game, like a treasure hunt. But they didn't know what to do, as Sharina might get into trouble. Dishar sent Vera off to rest and said he'd sort it out himself. He doubted Sharina had truly left. Sharente noticed that her favorite stone was also missing. Dishar asked his son if he was sure. For a child living in luxury, there could only be one reason to leave so easily. Kant was asked if he had seen her that evening. He replied that he hadn't, but he had heard the lady searching for information about shelters. Sharente was surprised that she could read. Kant said she could read all the books, but he didn't think much of it. The young duke could not believe that such a small child could read. At first glance, her scribbles appeared to be drawings, but upon closer inspection, letters were visible. Kant was ordered to collect data on shelters. He had to find her, but act secretly. There were few shelters, and a child with silver eyes wouldn't be hard to find. No matter how smart she was, Sharina was still a child. They would find her quickly. But Sharente didn't understand why it bothered him so much. The headmistress asked the children to stand in a row. Gela sensed something was wrong. The children looked frightened, and at the same time, excited. The woman was handing out candy. Gela noticed and wanted something sweet too. The woman praised one girl and sent her off to play. Gela had no idea where her candy was. She hadn't had pudding in a long time and was on edge. The headmistress told her to be patient, as Gela would soon be sent to a better place. This surprised her, as only a few days had passed. Gela realized she had no choice and resigned herself. The woman said that everyone with candy should follow her. A girl approached Gela and told her not to trust the headmistress. All the sweet children who were taken away disappeared within less than a month. No one knew where they disappeared to. They were spirited away under the pretext of beautiful clothes, but they never returned. The girl's frightened face made it clear she wasn't lying. Gela realized the shelter was nothing like it seemed. It turned out that the headmistress actually only wanted to sell Gela at a profit, hiding behind promises of a better life. The main character had previously considered the headmistress a kind woman. In any case, judging her by her appearance alone was a mistake. The little girl pointed to the children and asked where they had been taken. They said they were being adopted, but they weren't sure. After all, it was the same person who came every time. He showed up every 3 or 6 months. The little girl asked if they were being taken too, but the girls replied that they were lucky. Children their age weren't invited anymore. They looked to be about 11 or 12 years old, and no one wanted the older children. Jella had heard of places that merely pretended to be orphanages. Truly crazy things happen there. But Gela never thought she'd end up in a place where people are trafficked. She simply didn't know any other shelters. But now, compared to the local customs, Jella could go wherever she wanted. Walking wasn't allowed, but running was. She immediately started running. Human trafficking comes in different forms. The first is when children are purchased by families or aristocrats unable to have their own. It's similar to adoption without formal procedures, so no paperwork remains. It's a convenient way to pass off a child as your own, and the younger the child, the better. The second option is selling them to dangerous people. In this case, there's no guarantee the children will survive. Escaping the orphanage itself was a heroic feat, but finding another one was nearly impossible. Jella couldn't believe there wasn't a normal place where she could spend just a couple of years. The man told the little girl that they would see each other on the appointed day. His clothes didn't resemble the robes of Siliphi's mages, and it was unclear where he was from. He greeted the main character. The young man looked gloomy, as if dark energy emanated from him. The stranger noticed this was an unexpected surprise. The baby wasn't on the list he'd received, and there were too many curses and vows surrounding him. Jella couldn't even imagine how many people he had put into eternal sleep. She assumed he was a black magician, but who exactly he was remained a mystery. The man sat down next to her and said he was looking for a child with magical abilities similar to Gela's. He sounded about 30 or 40 years old. This meant a great deal of experience. Gela decided it was worth trying to attack, even as a child, and children have one very powerful weapon. It was hysterical. The main character started screaming that she didn't want to go anywhere. Gela was only 3 years old, and that was all she could do. Black magic is of little use against someone with powerful energy. If the magician isn't strong enough, they will simply drown in the enemy's darkness. The man said the little girl had no choice. She replied that she didn't care and wouldn't go anywhere. Jella was too stubborn to take a single step. In novels, the most interesting characters are the first to disappear, but Gela never thought she'd be one of them. She needed to figure out where she could even run. The main thing is to stay away from this guy. For the first time in her life, Gela saw such a powerful sorcerer. He said the girl was too gifted, and he had a favor to ask of her. Any mistake now could cost her her life. He even smiled like a true villain. At that moment, the headmistress burst in and asked what was going on. The man asked to sell the baby, assuring her that money was no problem. The woman hesitated, and he reminded her that she had planned to put her up for auction anyway. He offered twice the amount anyone had offered. Gela was shocked to realize they were already trying to sell her. The woman said the baby had only been there 2 days and hadn't completed her training. The stranger asked how long it would take. The headmistress replied that he would have to wait a month in any case. The man suggested 2 weeks. The main character couldn't understand what could be taught in that amount of time. The headmistress said she'd try. Gela couldn't understand why bad things always happened to her. It was hard to believe that a 3-year-old child had encountered such a cruel world. She would have resented the idea of being born at all if she had been an ordinary child. Or perhaps she had left the mansion too early. Sharina realized she should have stayed there until the academy. Then everything would have been different. But now she had to deal with the difficulties. The man smiled and said they would see each other again. The little girl sharply refused, and he immediately turned to her. He grabbed Sharina's hand and put the bracelet on. Gela immediately realized it was spell control magic. The man said she was probably gifted from birth. She was different from the others, which meant it would be easier to train her. Gela felt like her magic was no longer working, and her body felt heavy. The man said he'd return for her in 2 weeks. The woman called the little girl Lila and said that all this had happened because she had been naughty, so she should sit locked up and think. Gela didn't understand why she always found herself in such situations. The reason for her imprisonment was simple. She refused to carry out a strange order. The headmistress ordered her to hit the innocent girl, but Gela couldn't do it. She didn't understand why it was necessary to hurt her. The other children obeyed every order without question. If they were told to wait, they would wait. If they were ordered to strike, they would do so without hesitation. They were given candy for obedience. The children were obsessed with it. Gela decided that this was how they understood education here. About 30 years have passed since the end of the war. If you count minor conflicts, then only about 10. During the war, orphans suffered the most. They had neither food nor shelter. Without a headmistress, they would have died of starvation. She constantly reminded them of this, forcing them to feel fear. Thus, she easily instilled in them complete obedience. Gela realized they wanted to do the same to her. But she considered herself invincible as a warrior, Gela, and decided to try teleporting first. Nothing happened, and she realized magic was out of reach. Who would have thought that running away from home would lead here to a magical bracelet? Now the main character couldn't cast even the weakest spells. How the man had acquired such a rare artifact was unclear. Gela needed to remember his face. She knew all the archmages, but this one was unfamiliar, though he radiated danger. All hopes for a quick release disappeared, along with the ability to cast spells. Free time had arrived. Gela could rest easy, for as long as she wasn't sold, she wouldn't be sent into eternal sleep. But returning was fraught with danger. She imagined how happy everyone back home must be that she was gone. The thought made something inside her clench. After thinking it over again, Gela decided it was worth leaving after entering the academy. It was too rash to do so now. As a 3-year-old, there was little she could do. If she had known this would happen, she would have endured it. Whatever she thought, there was no way out. Gela decided to be obedient and escape at the first opportunity. For now, it was worth getting some sleep. Sleep helped restore her strength. After that, Gela reported to the head nurse, and a week had already passed. The woman asked Lala to stretch out her arms. This appeared before the protagonist. There was no fear, only a strange calm. Gela felt as if she had returned to the distant past, to the end of the war, when she found herself on the battlefield. She understood that this was a test of obedience's boundaries, a method for managing children without resistance. As long as the adult has candy, the system works perfectly. The principle seemed kind and forgiving. If a child obeys, they will definitely be rewarded, even if the reward is just candy. Remembering her childhood, Gela could come to terms with it. Back then, the dead lay all around her, and she had to starve and drink dirty water. Compared to the past, what was happening barely hurt her. Gela had already thought out an escape plan once the sorcerer removed the bracelet. Then she would take the teleportation stone and disappear. The woman demanded action now, and the little girl knew she would have to endure it. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, soft and confident. Charente said that if even a drop of blood fell, she would never return home. His cold confidence made Sharina feel sick. Charente pushed the boy away, and the headmistress rushed toward him. The main character was surprised. She didn't expect to see Charente himself here. He sat down next to her and asked why she had left home. Seeing his face, Gela felt relieved. If only because now she could get out. She realized she had greatly overestimated her strength. Gela realized how helpless a 3-year-old child was. The escape was impulsive and reckless. The little girl asked if he would put her into eternal sleep. The Duke reminded her that he wouldn't do that without a good reason. She asked because she'd already done something stupid. Charente picked up Sharina and examined her, finding no other wounds. The children began to scream in defense of the headmistress. For them, she was a mentor and their only salvation. Even if she led them into the very darkness, they would follow her. He couldn't understand how Sharina had ended up here, healthy. Gela herself didn't expect this. She acted foolishly, but chose to remain silent. Charente asked if they wanted to leave. Gela said she wanted to go home, and that any longer here would drive her crazy. The protagonist wanted to mentally go back a few steps and think it all over. The woman screamed at the Duke, demanding an explanation. Charente replied that she would soon find out who he was. For now, she'd better run if she wanted to stay alive. They rode in the carriage together. The Duke was silent the entire way, and it was clear he was angry. In gratitude, he left the classified documents untouched. Gela even felt sorry for him, even though she hadn't found them yet. The Duke asked her again why she had left. Gela was angry because they were going to send her to the academy, and she didn't want that. It was difficult for her to pronounce the word academy, especially with such a short tongue. Charente asked if she did it because of the academy. The little girl confirmed it and said she wanted him to raise her until she was 7. But the question was more complicated. She didn't know how to ask, so she asked if he hated her. Gela noticed that she was already speaking better. Apparently, constantly thinking about it played a role. She felt like she was saying his name in full for the first time. The Duke confirmed it. Charente said he hated her father, mother, sister, and anyone who violated their duty. He can't stand those who refuse their responsibilities. His voice was calm but icy. It seemed like it took a lot of effort for him to just say it. Gela couldn't understand where all this hatred came from. He's not a child, after all. She didn't know when he'd become so picky and asked if he could raise her until she was 7. It was only 3 years, but Gela realized she had overestimated herself. Charente assumed she would run away later. Gela confirmed this frankly. His surprise was incomprehensible to her, so she decided to speak frankly. She'll leave at 7, and he'll have to pretend he didn't notice. She said they hate each other. Charente asked again. He was offended that she responded in kind. Gela said she hated everyone. The Duke asked what she didn't like about her home. Her room was smaller than Kishan's, and she lacked space. Even the servants indulged in excesses, and she couldn't speak properly. She noticed his sigh and didn't understand the meaning. She thought he would refuse. Gela decided that he was too petty and offered to reduce the sentence to 5 years, considering herself generous. Valian changed greatly after a childhood accident. He played with the peasants and didn't behave as expected. One day he stumbled and found himself in a critical condition, after which he passed away. Charente said that Sharina would be under his protection as long as she lived in the clown's house. Gela refused. She didn't believe in success without action and was tired of putting up with this world. It was the same before Siliphi and during the war, when we had to survive. In a life where betrayal occurs at the first opportunity, it didn't matter whether it was family or comrades, the knife would always end up in the back. Besides, Gela wasn't really a member of this family and was a completely different person inside. Gela didn't want to be under Charente's protection. She'd been through too much and believed she had the right to decide for herself who to trust. Charente said that if she ran away from home again, he wouldn't look for her anymore. This was exactly what Gela was after. Charente noticed that she was truly stubborn. Sharina asked how he'd managed to find her in the first place. No matter how powerful the clown family was, Gela never expected to be found in such a place. It was even harder to imagine the Duke coming to a human trafficking ring alone. She didn't understand whether it was possible to simply come and leave everything as it was. The little girl asked if the headmistress would run away. Charente replied with a smile that only if she could. Gela thought that if he found her without a single clue, then it would be even easier for him to find the headmistress. In fact, Gela managed to save the contact information of the director and her son. More precisely, she grabbed some of their hair and hid it in the sole of her shoe, intending to later cast a curse. The more evil people commit, the more darkness accumulates. Dark energy grows, along with sins. Gela called out to Charente. She showed him the bracelet and said it seemed to block magic, even with a touch. Charente noted that such a thing was not something an ordinary orphanage director could obtain. He asked who had put the bracelet on. The little girl replied that she didn't know. The Duke realized there was clearly an intruder here. Gela confirmed that a man had put it on her. Charente assumed the man was a mage. Gela couldn't understand why such a clever Duke had bothered to look for her. She thought leaving a letter would have been enough. She asked if Charente had seen it. He replied that he had. Gela wondered why he'd gone looking for her then. She'd thought Deshar or Vera would be looking for her. It never occurred to her that Charente Clown himself would do this. He hated her, and Gela never hid it. Charente said he himself didn't know why he had followed her, adding that perhaps he should have simply left her. He asked her to sleep and promised to call a doctor. The little girl said she didn't want to. Charente said she still needed to rest. He had no patience for rudeness, and his voice was surprisingly soothing. His voice seemed to envelop him. Charente said he wasn't so cold-blooded as to disdain those who hadn't yet grown up. Gela thought it wasn't him, but the people around her, living quiet lives. The drowsiness was creeping in more and more. The warmth of someone else's body and the gentle pats on her back lingered for a long time. The protagonist sank into a deep, sweet sleep. The little girl could tell from Deshar's expression that he was barely holding back. He asked her if she liked the academy. Of course, she didn't like it. There were too many rules, and students were required to live permanently within the academy's walls. Deshar asked why she didn't just say so. Gela found it difficult to speak with such pronunciation, and she apologized. No matter how you look at it, it was her fault. Charente corrected her, demanding she speak correctly. Gela didn't understand why this had suddenly become so important. She couldn't treat the clown family with too much respect. She was always respectful during negotiations, but Charente expected more. Charente said there would be no pudding. Gela couldn't understand how someone could treat her only joy so cruelly. Charente had money and power. He could eat whatever he wanted. But Sharina only got pudding once a day, if Vera brought it. Sharina apologized again. Deshar noted that this behavior was completely unlike her. Deshard said he was very worried about her. Gela reminded him of the letter. The Duke doubted it could be called a letter. Jella agreed, but still considered it a letter, even if it was just a few words. It seemed she was wrong about everything. She failed to escape properly and only worsened the situation. Deshar reminded her that the academy issue had not yet been resolved and could be discussed later. The little girl said the number 7. Deshar asked if that meant she'd go to the academy at 7. Gela, however, was planning to simply leave home. Since she'd already told Sharente about it, she had to lie. Sharente had told her father outright that Sharina was planning to leave home at 7. Gela was angry that he'd revealed this. Now it became clear where Kishan got this habit from. Deshar asked if she'd leave like that again. Gela suddenly longed to be a baby again. She decided she should speak more rationally. With a pacifier in her mouth, the world seemed less scary. Deshar asked if anything was troubling her at home. In the Empire, it's forbidden to include the name of a person presumed dead in the registry. Since Valiant Clown was presumed dead, there was no proof of Sharina's existence. The only option left was to register her as Sharente's or Deshar's dependent. Gela planned to leave the mansion as soon as she had gathered the strength for revenge. She gradually became accustomed to this version of herself and believed she had done a good job. The little girl asked about Vera. Deshar said she was shocked by her disappearance and was now resting, knowing Sharina had returned. Sharina should have apologized to her. Gela asked if she could go. She decided to feign obedience so she could get the stone later. That's how their relationship developed. Gela took advantage of Deshar, and he tried to atone for his guilt before the children. Deep down, the little girl considered him a coward. To earn a child's trust, you can't treat them like a pet. But Deshar would never know if Sharina was sincere. Meanwhile, the man was scolding the headmistress. She blamed herself and returned the money she had received as a deposit. He reminded her that he doesn't tolerate lies and asked who did it. The woman said she didn't know, only that a man had come and taken the girl. She described his appearance. The mage immediately recognized it as Sharente Clown. Of all the aristocrats, he was the only one who fit the description. The mage had never heard of his daughter. The woman couldn't understand how the girl had ended up at the orphanage. She assumed she was her niece, since Lila had spoken of her uncle. The mage doubted it, but remembered that the Clown family kept many secrets. They preferred to keep silent about the fact that 2 children had disowned the family. Only Sharente took responsibility and became a true clown. It's not hard to guess that the family situation was difficult, since the child wanted to run away. The mage decided he wouldn't use the child, and he wouldn't look for her any further. Most likely, he was alarmed by the appearance of the silver-eyed girl at the orphanage. It was out of honor that he set out to search. As he said, the headmistress already bore the mark of death. It was a sign of black magic. Taking someone else's loot wasn't Asia's style. He declared he would take all the remaining children. The woman asked again, not believing what she'd heard. He repeated, "Everyone! You don't make deals with the dead." The woman tried to offer something. Asi thought he'd leave empty-handed, but the situation changed. He asked where the headmistress was heading. The woman said she wanted to leave the Empire with her son, not knowing that the man was Klaus. People branded with black magic cannot shake it off. Even if she escapes, the spell will plunge her into eternal sleep. Unless the mage agreed to erase the mark for a fee, Asi doubted her sincerity. The woman asked where he was taking the children. Asia was in a good mood today. He said they would be digging for ore. The headmistress asked if that was all. Black magic impressed him, but the manager would soon disappear anyway. Asi hoped they would remember the trip for a long time, if it won't be the last. 2 days after Sharente removed Sharina's bracelet, it became clear that such devices were made using the Philosopher's Stone. It can only be found in ruins. Unlike regular stones, it destroys magical abilities. Only magicians can process the Philosopher's Stone because it absorbs their power. It took Sharente a long time to acquire it. Only true masters possess such things. The little girl asked Vera for something to eat. Vera said she would stay with her and have lunch together. Gela noticed that Vera looked angry, but didn't leave. The maid suggested she lie down and stay close. This went on for several days. Vera never left Sharina's side. Gela was speechless when she saw Vera's tear-stained face. She expected anger, but saw tears. Gela understood her guilt. But she couldn't promise to always be there. The bracelet had already been removed, and it was time to cast the curse. But being alone was not an option. Sharina thought she should apologize again. At that moment, a wave of magic washed over her, and Vera grabbed her. The little girl realized that if destruction began, Vera would be the first to suffer. She couldn't understand why she was risking herself. Vera asked if everything was okay. Gela knew that feeling and understood that it wasn't about the mansion. Vibration and trembling meant the birth of new ruins. This used to happen often. The barriers, magic eventually breaks through. In such places, magic is especially active, and the Council of Salafia is usually the first to know. But this time there was no warning. It seemed strange. The appearance of ruins within the Empire was impossible to miss. Gela couldn't understand where Mylene had gone. You always need to prepare for ruins in advance. They don't just appear out of nowhere. They are guarded by a creature that controls the entrance. Therefore, an envoy from Salofia should arrive soon, perhaps a research team as well. Sharina suggested that Vera leave. She agreed. Kishan's father calmed him down. The boy saw Sharina. Sharente asked if she was hurt. Gela replied that everything was fine. Sharente ordered them to leave quickly. The main character was confused. They went outside, and panic reigned all around. Panic was everywhere. Some houses have probably already collapsed. Salofia was spending enormous amounts of money. She didn't want to go back into debt. Deshar ordered to stop the panic and inspect the mansion. He asked about the children. Kishan said everything was fine. Deshar asked Sharina about her wounds. Sharente corrected her again. Gela remembered to bow. The mansion's protective magic was strong. She thought that Vera was busy helping others. Kishan took Sharina's hand, promising to protect her. He was 7, but he still acted like a child. It was endearing. Gela wanted to see the ruins. A little teleportation, and she was ready. Sharente forbade her to go outside and ordered Kishan to keep an eye on her. It wasn't fair. The ruins were Gela's whole life. Deshar asked about news from Salofia. Sharente said the answer had already arrived. The woman greeted the Duke. Sharente noticed the uninvited guests. He greeted His Majesty and noted that at first he did not recognize him. Gela didn't understand why the Emperor was here. Less than an hour had passed, and he was already talking about the rumors about Sharente's daughter. Hela looked at the Emperor with curiosity, wondering if everyone in his family had such golden hair. He pointed at her and asked if she was the new daughter. Sharente immediately replied that he wasn't. Sharina also hastened to deny it, as being his daughter seemed like a nightmare to her. If that were true, she would have run away to the first suitable family. The Emperor introduced Ellie and Dali and sent them off to play with Kishan. He warned them not to offend him, as he was the Duke's nephew. Deshar asked if something serious had happened. The Emperor replied that they most likely already knew about the new ruins. He clarified that the ruins were only 5 kilometers from the village of Onyx. The little girl was amazed at how close it was. At such a distance, the ruin guardian could easily mistake the villagers for invaders. Guardians guard territories of varying sizes, depending on their species. Those with wings typically control vast areas. The roar heard recently likely belonged to a Vivon, a small but extremely ferocious species of dragon that soars high in the sky. Sharente asked if there was any news from Salofia. The Emperor replied that there had been no warning, and that this was generally understandable. Right now, their attention is focused on already known ruins. New ones appear suddenly, and predicting their exact direction is almost impossible. Gela expected the Emperor to start blaming Salofia, but that didn't happen. It seemed the ruler, who had subjugated an entire continent, didn't quite fit her expectations. And yet, monitoring the emergence of ruins was their direct responsibility. They should have at least notified the palace, and the Emperor assured them that they had done so. He added that he had already received information about the keeper and the method of entry. This surprised Deshar, and Gela also felt something wasn't adding up. If the ruins' appearance had been unexpected, then how they could have been so aware of what was going on inside remained a mystery. Penetrating ruins is always difficult. Since they were shrouded in ancient magic, access there is limited. Sometimes there are strict conditions, even gender restrictions. Sometimes only those who can solve a special puzzle are allowed inside. Gela became uneasy and suspected the Senate's interference, perhaps deliberately stalling for time. But even stranger was that the powerful magical flare-up hadn't been noticed in Salofia. Gela even created a magical magnifying glass for such an event. The Emperor merely said it would be sufficient to speak with the council. He added that they had already lost the only leader with whom they could negotiate, and now everyone realized the scale of their mistake. These words sent shivers down Gela's spine, making it hard to breathe. Sharente picked her up, and gently asked her to calm down. As a strange feeling engulfed her entire body, the world around her seemed to turn white. The girl clung to the Duke, barely holding back her tears. The Emperor remarked that the Duke's niece must be very sensitive. The trembling gradually subsided as he moderated his pressure. Charente asked Sharina if she was okay. After receiving an affirmative answer, he sent her to Kishan, after which she felt embarrassed by her weakness. Jella couldn't understand how she could be so frightened that her knees were shaking, and she found it strange that she had been left standing here alone. The Emperor mentioned they were thinking of sending a few men. Hela moved closer, hoping to overhear something important about the ruins. The Emperor's daughter approached her and asked her name. Hela wanted her to go away so she could eavesdrop. Kishan immediately intervened and said the baby's name was Sharina. Gela silently praised him, as it suited her. The Emperor debated whether the power of a single artifact could equal that of an entire army. Instead of giving up the chance to other countries, it was worth acquiring at least one more. He noticed that the Empire already had such an artifact, in Charente. Gela realized that the relic had long had an owner. She became curious about this artifact, as it was rarely mentioned. She decided to learn as much as she could while she had the chance. The Emperor's daughter introduced herself as Elian and pointed to her younger brother, Dalian. She said she was pleased to meet Sharina. Sharina, however, didn't share this enthusiasm and simply waited for the girl to leave. Meanwhile, the Emperor remarked that the palace could use another artifact. Jella missed most of the conversation and never understood what exactly it was about. Ultimately, she decided to stop listening. Elian was touched when she looked at Sharina, calling her sweet. Dalian, however, was perplexed why no one was paying attention to them and looked irritated. Jella wanted to deal with them quickly, as they were in the way. But she didn't interfere and turned to her brother. Kishan was surprised and pleased that his sister called him by name. He approached her and asked why she had called him, but Gela remained silent. Charente's son was a real thorn in her side at times, but he treated her like a sister, which meant he'd always be by her side. Sharina quietly said she was scared. Kishan immediately stood in front of her and asked the children not to come near her because his sister was scared. Gela noted that he behaved like a true clown, proudly blocking the path of even members of the imperial family. Charente informed the Emperor that everything would be ready by the following day. The ruler replied that the matter was urgent and the departure was scheduled for noon. Jella regretted that she never found out exactly how to get into the ruins and missed the chance to learn more about the artifact. The Emperor asked the Duke to take care of the prince and princess, and Dashar agreed. Gela wasn't happy about this, since it looked like the children would be staying here. It made sense that the Emperor would explore the ruins himself and leave the children safe. But their mutual trust was surprising. The ruler looked at the little girl and said they would meet again next time. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the feeling remained unpleasant. The children chided Kishan for his stubbornness, but he still wouldn't let them approach his sister. Jella herself didn't even notice how things had turned out this way. She didn't understand what was going on. Elian insisted that Sharina play with her, since her brother saw her sister every day. Jella couldn't understand how they'd become so close. Kishan firmly refused because Sharina was scared. Kishan cried the whole time and looked like a beaten puppy, but Gela didn't believe it was an act. Today he was surprisingly brave. Dalian reminded Kishan that he was speaking to the prince's older sister and should let her play with Sharina. His speech sounded funny due to his missing front teeth. Kishan replied that even with him, Sharina didn't play every day. Sharina wanted to apologize, considering what had happened her fault. She approached the princess and extended her hand. Surprised, the princess asked if Sharina really wanted to play, and then the girl offered her hand to Kishan. They took each other's hands, and Dalian looked confused. Gela barely restrained herself from making a caustic comment, but Sharina only had 2 arms, so she offered the boy to take hold of her shoulder. Dalian said that if his sister was satisfied, that was enough. They all seemed grown up enough, but they still made a scene over trifles. Jella wanted to mind her own business. Sharina called her grandfather and asked permission to go to the garden. Dashar asked for clarification and, upon receiving confirmation, agreed. Jella decided to leave the children in the garden and get rid of the cursed doll herself by throwing it into the water. Dashar let them go. Charente was surprised to learn that no trace of the orphanage remained. The knight reported that nothing had been found and asked about the director. They told him they hadn't been able to interrogate her. The escape attempt was immediately discovered, but only her body was recovered. Charente inquired about the cause of death. There were some guesses, but one thing seemed odd. They were quickly tracked down, but their bodies were already swollen and their lungs filled with water. The hotel had no bathroom, and their bodies seemed saturated with moisture. Hearing that this was the reason they were plunged into eternal sleep, Charente realized that black magic was involved. There was a similar case recently involving Baroness Sullivan, who died under mysterious circumstances without leaving a trace. Charente asked if it seemed similar. The knight replied that there was indeed a similarity. The door was locked, and the water was only around the bodies. Charente asked if anything was known about Sharina's buyer. The knight said there were no changes, and the search was ongoing. Charente let him go. The Duke understood that such matters were not resolved quickly, but the lack of results irritated him. He thought about Shiren. This child was nothing but trouble. Even Valian had never found himself in such a situation, and Charente suspected that Sharina was involved in the Baroness's death. Perhaps it was due to mishandling black magic, and even now, he still had doubts. The little girl was smarter than Kishan, and often acted beyond her years. It's possible that a hidden grudge drove her to this act. The only question that remained was whether it was intentional. Charente hoped it wouldn't happen again, but he couldn't be sure. Even if that wasn't true, he was amazed that a child could even touch black magic. It seemed absurd to him. In any case, Sharina isn't in the family register. Perhaps she should have been left alone when she decided to leave, regardless of her fate. But Charente still didn't understand why he'd gone so far after her. He believed he should have done as Valian and Rainian had. He didn't understand the point of bringing back those who had decided to put something above family. In the end, he decided to worry less about the child and take only trusted people to explore the ruins. Only the one wearing the crown may enter. This could signify either the ruler or one with the power to command. One word was not enough to be sure, so they decided that the emperor would go in person. From the temple's side, the knight Simula and the priest joined the expedition. Charente noted that several mages were also sent from Solofia, including the head of the mage tower. The ruins were too close to the village, and the monsters needed to be eliminated as quickly as possible. It was best to limit the force to a minimum. Charente was still wary of leaving the house unattended. Sharina was acting too self-consciously for a child. She seemed to expect no mercy from anyone and treated people with caution, without regret or sadness. The only person she trusted was Vera. Her childhood, it seems, was difficult. Charente did not notice that Sharina's previous heavy thoughts had returned. Elian asked which dress was more beautiful, putting on a real fashion show in someone else's house. Self-satisfied people love to talk about their exceptionalism, and this perfectly described the emperor's daughter. Sharina pointed to one of the dresses. Elian was delighted and said she was confident in her choice. Dalian said that all the dresses were the same, and Kishan praised Sharina, calling her the best. Gela wanted to say that the dress had been deliberately pushed forward. Dalian invited Sharina to the palace. Sharina refused because she had more than enough of the clowns, and the meeting with the emperor did not make her happy. The emperor took part in battles from childhood and ascended the throne at the age of 17 during the war. Having won, he quickly subjugated the continent and within 10 years restored the empire. He didn't seem scary on the surface, but once he showed his true side, everything became clear. He simply skillfully hid his claws. Dalian didn't understand the little girl's refusal. The prince started an argument, but Elian interrupted him, saying that she was hungry. Gela didn't understand why she was left with the children. She wanted to go to the ruins and didn't want to waste time here. The maid arrived and announced it was time for a snack. Elian was delighted with the sweets. Gela was upset, but Vera's appearance with pudding fixed everything. Vera fed the baby, and the delicate caramel pudding melted in her mouth. Dalian asked how many classes she had. Gela didn't immediately understand the question. The prince said he had 10 lessons a day and did not understand how Sharina could complain. Sharina didn't have a single class. They'd already finished talking, and the thought of 10 lessons a day was staggering. Sharina decided there was no point in arguing, since he was from the imperial family. Vera asked if the baby had finished eating, but Sharina replied that she was busy. The protagonist needed to return to her room and head to the ruins. A little more, and she felt almost in paradise. Dalian asked where the little girl had gone, and Gela said she'd gone to the bathroom. Gela reflected that if she could learn the spell and pronounce it correctly, she would be able to cover enormous distances in one go. Unlike her previous body, this one hadn't yet absorbed dark magic, so now it was more convenient to draw on external power. Gela decided to take the risk. It all looked awkward. But she tried anyway. It didn't work, and Gela decided it wasn't worth trying with that pronunciation. A space bound by time that cannot be subdued must reveal a hidden path for Sharina. Deep beneath the inaccessible earth, the main character had to draw on a huge amount of external magic to protect the magical stones. Kishan searched for Sharina and was greatly surprised when he found her. Kishan leaped toward his sister, not understanding why, and the main character realized that all was lost. The next moment, they found themselves in a clearing. The little girl was in great pain. She didn't know if the boy understood what he had just done. Gela noted that he was truly strong. Kishan told Sharina he would protect her. He spoke these words confidently, hiding his face in her shoulder and trembling slightly. But he didn't run away. He was scared out of his wits, but he still wanted to protect the main character. It was both cute and awkward. Frankly, it would have sounded bad in the future if he'd become Gela's enemy. Kishan asked Sharina if she was okay. His silver eyes trembled, but he had no intention of crying. The girl said she was fine. A wave of pride washed over Gela. He was ready to sacrifice himself for his sister. Kishan asked where they were, but the little girl said she didn't know. They hadn't gone far, so they'd have to use transport magic again. Gela didn't know if Kishan would ever become her enemy, but she knew she had to let him go. The little girl asked him for his hand. The boy put down his sword and took his sister's hand. Gela understood that if things continued like this, things would only get worse. This couldn't be allowed. Kishan asked what was in the distance. Sharina said it was ruins. The boy remarked that his father was probably there now, and Gela was struck by how much he cared about his family. Her brother said he'd heard a lot about her special gift, and now he realized it was true. He called Sharina phenomenal and asked if she missed her dad. Sharina replied that she hadn't. She didn't understand what nonsense he was talking about, and she couldn't even imagine missing Sharente. Not in this life. A large crowd had gathered at the ruins. The Simula Knights with the priest, imperial warriors, soldiers of the clown family, and other aristocrats. Kishan saw his father and started calling him. Sharina was horrified and tugged at her brother's sleeve, but he didn't understand what was happening. The emperor said that they had wasted a lot of time on guard and asked everyone to quickly enter inside. One of the knights was thrown back by magic, and the emperor noticed he wasn't coming. The knights approached the entrance one by one. The emperor announced the group's composition: 2 Simula Knights, 2 Palace Warriors, 2 Temple Warriors, and Marquise Mural. Almost 7 men. Charente added that there were 9 of them with the emperor. Gela had expected this, but getting into the ruins proved difficult. Gela noticed the knight who had been with Ranian. He was here too, so it wasn't the king who could enter the ruins, but the one with the right to command. They were talking about people capable of becoming conquerors. That's why there are so many leaders here, including the head of the Simul Knights. Under these conditions, getting inside is even more difficult. 9 people were already considered part of the research team. However, no one from Salafia was there, and it was clear from their faces that Melon hadn't arrived. Why this was so was unclear. Gela decided not to worry about it. Exploring ruins is rarely easy. The main difficulty is that a leader can't take everyone he wants. Those rejected by the ruins will never be allowed inside. Gela was also curious about what was inside, but right now she didn't have the necessary abilities, and everything looked dangerous, so it was better to observe from the sidelines. She thought about taking a walk and taking Kishan with her. Charente said he would go first, and the emperor gave his permission. It never even occurred to them that the ruins might reject them. Gela longed for the same assurance. Perhaps this is how conquerors behave. Kishan stood up and called for his father. Sharina realized all was lost. Charente was completely perplexed and couldn't understand how his son had ended up there. Gela understood he was only 7 years old, but how could he be so reckless? Nothing would have happened to him if his dad hadn't been there. Sharina was already considering running away before she was spotted. Kishan knew he'd be scolded, but he had no intention of revealing his sister's identity. The main character, unsure what to do, emerged from the bushes. Charente knew she was using magic and must have figured it out. People began to talk about the child, knowing that he was from the clown family. But no one understood who the girl next to Charente's son was. The children were called hooligans, and no one understood how they had managed to walk there. Moreover, many remembered the recent incident at the mansion. Charente asked who had come up with the idea to hide in the wagon. Gela realized he was simply trying to smooth things over. Gela knew the nobles had a low opinion of mages. If they found out a child of the clown family used magic, It would damage their reputation. Sharina said they were playing hide and seek. Kishan admitted that they then noticed the cart and climbed in. Gela noted that he spoke fluently, but her father clearly understood everything. People decided that the children were simply hiding, and remembered that their own children had done the same. Sharente ordered Shudakal to take the men and take the children back. He accepted the order. Sharente asked if Sharina had anything she wanted to tell him. He was as unfriendly as always, but something was different now. Before, when he was angry, he acted differently. Gela wasn't happy to see him either. To be honest, Gela only lived in the mansion for 2 years. She simply wanted to take a look at the new ruins and wasn't about to get into trouble. She would have been home within an hour. She had plenty of excuses, but out of pride, she kept silent. Sharente turned to the emperor and offered to let him pass. The emperor said he had known Kishan for a long time and didn't believe he was capable of such a thing. But seeing Sharente's despair, he decided to remain silent. Gela was furious with Kishan. The air shook with a faint wave of magic. It was difficult to notice unless one was a sensitive mage. Gela didn't understand what was happening when she was lifted into the air. Kishan grabbed Sharina's hand, and they took off together. Sharente tried to grab his son. The protagonist realized this was the end. Gela couldn't understand how things had come to this. As soon as they found themselves in the ruins, the magic suddenly vanished. Sharina was being pulled at incredible speed, and she couldn't stop anymore, and she would crash into the wall. The sensation was strange, soft, and hard at the same time. The man asked if she was okay. The girl realized it was the knight who had married Ranian. She couldn't understand how he had ended up there. He asked if she remembered him. Gela knew very well who had taken Ranian, who held a special place in her heart. Kishan asked again if she was okay. Even now, he was thinking about protecting his sister, not himself. The knight lowered the children to the ground. Sharente ran up. Gela was startled when she heard him call her by name. He asked Kishan if he was hurt. Gela assumed he was simply worried about his son. Overall, the ruins looked normal. The entrance resembled the beginning of a long cave. A deep space opened up underground, where each tier held a monster or a riddle in an ancient language. To descend further, you must defeat monsters or solve a puzzle. Leaving the ruins is impossible until your exploration is complete. If the king himself could enter here, the ruins were extremely unruly. Gela hadn't expected to find herself here at all, and she wondered how many levels there were. Sharente picked up Sharina and asked if she was okay. Gela couldn't understand why he was so worried, and it seemed suspicious. The emperor asked Sharant if everything was all right. The duke replied in the affirmative. The children were ordered to leave the area immediately. Gela noticed that Sharente was more agitated than ever. She couldn't remember him ever being this excited. Moreover, once you enter the ruins, it's impossible to escape. Sharente knew this, but his nervousness made him behave strangely. Gela couldn't even remember when anyone had been so worried about her. She herself didn't want to go on living as a child. Kishan tried to get out. Sharente asked what had happened. His son said a sudden current, like a wind, had swept Sharina away. Gela was proud of these words. This time she didn't have to justify herself. Now Sharina truly wasn't guilty of anything. Sharina didn't understand why Sharente was looking at her like that. He seemed to think it was her fault again. The girl said she didn't know anything. It was unfair, because Gela really wasn't to blame. Sharente said Sharina had to leave and asked if she intended to stand there any longer. From the outside, it might have seemed like he was simply worried. Gela would have left too if she could. She didn't think even a child could enter the ruins. Gela had the mind of an adult, but the body of a child. How Kishan ended up here remained a mystery. The boy asked again if everything was all right. He doesn't bear the Klonov name for nothing. He may look foolish, like a child, but he's ready to protect his sister at any cost. The emperor said the ruins have accepted them, and there's no escape. The knight asked permission to take care of Shireen. For Gela, this was far better than relying on Sharente, who was busy with Kishan. Gela felt like Ranian was interested in her. Rumor had it he carried her in his arms, so he would protect Gela in the same way. Unless dark magic is used directly against a holy knight, the damage will be minimal. You just need to stay near them for at least a week. Sharente addressed Wirad von Gressel. Gela thought his name was too colorful, and she felt uneasy. The Duke said he hadn't expected the commander of the Holy Knights to arrive in person. Gela was surprised to learn who he was. Wirad replied that no other suitable people were available. The emperor remarked that now was not the time for arguments. Entering the ruins meant fulfilling the entry requirements. Until the research was complete, No one would leave. The knight called Sharina to him, and Gela understood why Rainian liked him. He will not back down from his convictions under any circumstances, even in the face of death. Such a person can be trusted, but when confronted with an enemy, he becomes a dangerous opponent and refuses to compromise. He told the little girl not to go any lower. It was too dangerous. Gela also wanted to live near Rainian. She thought the Holy Knight would be unpleasant, but things turned out differently. Previously, she couldn't stand people with holy powers. She'd gotten too caught up in black magic and avoided them. It's funny that now he's the only one she can rely on. The most interesting part was yet to come. The Emperor found himself inside the ruins for the first time and remarked on how amazing it was. He asked the Marquis if he had been there before. Marquis Morel said it was his first time too, and promised not to cause any inconvenience. He seemed too quiet, and Gela couldn't understand how he'd gotten there. Gela was surprised that the only experienced explorers here were the Duke and Sir Wirad. Two of Simel's knights had also participated earlier. Despite the long journey, Kishan didn't look tired. Gela noted his good stamina. Sharina was annoyed that she tired faster than anyone else. Inside, the ruins looked simple, with a long passageway stretching out at first. At the end was an empty space, like a large room. Sharina felt a subtle magic all around her. It seemed no one else noticed, as everyone continued calmly on. If anyone got hurt, setting up camp would be difficult. Sharina, trying to get the knight's attention, tugged at his clothes. He leaned over and asked what was wrong. The Emperor also turned around. The little girl pointed ahead and said there was something strange there, asking everyone to look. The Emperor decided that she was afraid of the dark and offered to take her in his arms. Gela knew there was something there. The knight asked her to wait and said he sensed a monster. The Emperor asked again, and the commander lowered the baby to the floor. The knight asked to be allowed to investigate. He drew his sword, and Gela immediately recognized it as an artifact, one of 3 in the Heron Empire. She couldn't believe a sacred artifact was here. Usually base artifacts are found in dragon caves. Where sacred artifacts should be, monsters, puzzles, or spiritual trials usually await. Lowly artifacts are much weaker. The Emperor noticed a remarkable strength in Charente's niece. The Duke dismissed it as just a good hunch and asked her not to come any closer. The Emperor noted that she had noticed something others would not have. The knight returned and reported that he had dealt with all the dragons. He appeared at the perfect moment. The knight was incredibly agile and, even holding a sacred artifact, dealt with them quickly and without wasting any time. If this continued, their exploration would soon come to an end. But they were only able to descend to the next level an hour after dealing with the dragons. The knights reported on the areas they had checked. The Emperor said that if there was no exit anywhere, it meant they were on the last level. However, this turned out to be untrue. Typically, the places where an artifact is kept appear more majestic or tranquil. One glance is enough to understand that there is no further way. It seemed none of them had been in these ruins before. The exit seemed easy to find, but they walked around every wall, examining every stone, and even after that, they found nothing. The stone said to feel the weight of the crown, but Gela had no idea what that meant. The protagonist decided that if there were no doors in the walls, they must be in the floor. The problem was the darkness and the vast area to search. Kishan asked Sharina what she was doing. She replied that she was just taking a walk. The boy offered to walk with him, but Sharina wasn't thrilled. But Kishan protected and cared for her, so she could endure it. Suddenly, Sharina noticed something. She was confused and assumed that someone of a certain stature was needed here. Ideas swirled in Gela's head, even the thought of simply breaking through the place. But that would have caused unpredictable damage. Gela had a strange habit of sucking on a pacifier. Sharina ran up to the knight and grabbed his legs. He was surprised, and the little girl asked to see what she had found. Sharina felt like she was being watched. It was Charente. She wondered if he was pleased since Gela had specifically asked the knight to spare the Duke's attention. The knight examined the area and decided it was an ordinary floor. The Emperor suggested that Sir Wirad play along. After all, it was thanks to this little girl that they had arrived here without losses. Gela understood that for him, all of this was either a joke or complete absurdity. Although Gela pointed to the spot, they were skeptical. The knight asked again and tested the floor with his sword. The Emperor asked if there was anything there. Wirad said the entrance was sealed with powerful magic and called Sharina. Charente looked stern, but Gela rejoiced, thinking he was upset by her success. The emperor asked if this meant there was an entrance. Weirad confirmed this and added that it couldn't be opened by force. Another method was needed. The answer was obvious. The magic in the ruins was too complex, and it was unknown what the consequences of attempting to break it would be. Jella decided she simply needed to maintain her weight. The problem was, no one knew what it was. And she also didn't know how to convey this idea. While intuition can be attributed to something, a 3-year-old child's solution to the riddle would have seemed too strange. The emperor was surprised that she was the daughter of that same mad clown. Jella couldn't even imagine what Sharina's father had done to make people talk about him like that. The emperor leaned over and asked how she discovered it. The main character said she was a genius and knew it all along. She couldn't explain it properly and said everything seemed strange. The girl decided to just talk nonsense to get them to leave her alone. She wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. The little girl turned to His Highness and said she was bored and wanted to play. Jella knew all she could do was be capricious. The emperor was the most important thing here, even if not by weight. It was logical to start with him. He looked disappointed. It was clear he was holding back, perhaps because he had children. The emperor asked what she wanted to play. When the emperor stood in that spot, everything began to crumble. Hela was delighted, realizing that his weight alone was enough. The heroine wanted to stop it, but everything was happening too fast. The emperor didn't understand what was happening, and they fell together. Jella was clearly feeling lucky today. She was glad she'd thought to put the magic stone in her pocket. Sharina tried to use the stone, but saw Charente flying after her. He managed to grab the baby. With the artifact's help, the Duke descended safely. The emperor asked if everything was all right. Charente replied that the child was simply very frightened. This upset Sharina a little, but she admitted that she was indeed shaking. Charente also looked worried and confused. He ordered her not to act stupid and not to leave his side. This outraged Gela, since it was she who had found the way. Then Charente picked up Sharina and told her she wouldn't have to walk anymore. Jella didn't understand what he meant. He added that her help was no longer needed, so the baby had to hold on tight. Sharina didn't understand this, because without her, they would have been stuck here for a long time. No matter how hard Gela tried to ignore it, these words cut too deep. Being useless was her greatest fear. Charente said he knew how smart she was and how different she was from other children. But looking at her, he couldn't help but wonder. Everyone has to be a child sometimes. As long as Sharina was under his protection, he would keep his oath to the clowns. She doesn't need to do anything now. Jella noticed he was acting unusually and didn't expect to hear such words from him. She felt strange and unfamiliar. She hadn't heard anything like this in a long time, especially from him. Gela's life had always been different, without rest or respite. She even begrudged time for sleep, so being a child turned out not to be so bad. Children are forgiven almost everything, and they are always ready to protect them. This period doesn't last long. Gela even forgot about revenge. Charente warned that things could get more dangerous. Therefore, Sharina needed to sit quietly and forget about everything, at least for a while. Luck is also a skill. The emperor was curious, because this family was completely different from the others, as if they weren't from here. It was best not to move now. If Gela made a mistake, she might just be thrown out. She didn't want anyone to find out about her magic. If this were to come to light, the reputation of the clown family would suffer. Things could turn out very badly. The imperial family doesn't like mages. Everyone was present, and they could move on. The emperor wondered if someone could have been here before. A high, beautiful voice rang out, hard to resist. He was easily captivating, reminiscent of distant laughter, as if from another world. A little more, and Gela herself would have succumbed to his charms. She spotted Kishan and realized he was almost under the voice's spell. Sharina asked Weirad to put her down and ran to the boy. It was a siren song. So far, it's only affected Kishan, as children are more sensitive to high-pitched sounds. People with good hearing are more easily enchanted. Gela didn't know how it would affect her. The pacifier began to glow. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but it was more important to bring her brother to his senses. Charente and the emperor watched. Sharina tried to get through to Kishan, but he walked towards the door as if enchanted. Charente lifted Kishan. The Marquis asked if he could be examined. His pupils were dilated. The Marquis said the boy looked bewitched. Sharina screamed that it was a siren, but it didn't come out very clearly. She repeated it again. The men looked at her with bewilderment. Gela knew her pronunciation was poor, but the meaning was clear. She couldn't understand why Kishan hadn't reacted this way before. The emperor recalled the legends of sirens luring travelers, but that was at sea. Gela noted that he had little knowledge of the lesser monsters. Many of them looked human. Sir confirmed that the sirens were monsters. They don't just enchant with their voices, they lull their victims into an eternal sleep, tearing them apart. Gela mentally gave the answer a perfect score. Temples are often cleansed, so he knows about monsters firsthand. Sir said he'd handle it himself. Sharina didn't understand what was happening. When a siren dies, it releases a deadly poison, and it had to be stopped. The sea, poisoned by this toxin, became dangerous and dead for a long time. If even a drop of poison escaped the ruins, they might never see the light of day. So the little girl stood before the knight and refused. The emperor paused and asked why not. The question sounded friendly, but it was fraught with danger. He didn't fully realize his importance and the risk, as if he didn't think they might not return. Sharina said she didn't know and fell down because of a headache, pretending it was nothing to do with it. She said the voice was constantly playing in her head. This time, it could be chalked up to a strange phenomenon. The emperor asked again. Gela tried to feign tears, but it didn't work. Sometimes boredom itself produces tears, and sometimes it doesn't. Sharente asked if everything was okay. Gela decided to add saliva under her eyes, and the effect was convincing. The emperor asked if this had ever happened before. Sir replied no, but anything was possible in ruins. It was true. Common sense doesn't work in ruins. Anything can happen. The emperor asked what the voices were saying. The little girl said they told her to cover her ears. The emperor was surprised. Sharina showed her how. The ruler assumed that they wanted to attack, but Sharina said that if they did not close their ears and open their eyes, there would be no way out. Sirens don't attack first, and don't touch those who aren't under a spell. Sharina screamed that they would all die. The emperor asked the duke's opinion. After all, Sharina was his niece, and his words were important. Sharente remained silent, as if his life depended on it. He asked if that was the voices. Sharina realized it could all be attributed to them. She'd seen plenty of ruins and monsters, but she couldn't say for sure.